welcome to my presentation addressing disproportionality and discipline in special education. This presentation has some impact, reform, and some call to action for exploring factors and solutions for Black students in school districts. Now let's get some understanding about what disproportionality really is and why does it occur and how does it occur. It occurs when a group of students is overrepresented in one area and underrepresented in another area compared to other students in their school or district. Typically, Black students are overrepresented in special education and underrepresented in gifted education. Now, when we talk about disproportionality, we have some contributing factors. Implicit bias would be one of those. Socioeconomic challenges is another, and cultural misunderstandings is the last one. Black students typically do face a higher rate of suspension, expulsion, and special education placement, meaning they are disproportionately overrepresented when it comes down to those three factors. When it also comes to socioeconomic challenges, students that are typically in a lower economic status will have contributing factors that will affect disproportionality as well. Cultural misunderstandings mean just what it is. You may not understand why a student wears a certain thing or talks a certain way or acts a certain way because that is not a part of your particular culture. We can't stop disproportionality, but we can definitely slow it. So we know what disproportionality is. Now let's talk about who's affected. We have three categories of people who are affected when we talk about disproportionality. We have our students, we have our families, and the educators that serve those students and families each day. Students experience negative peer reactions, they have feelings of inadequacy, and a likelihood and increase of a school-to-prison pipeline. Families have limited understanding of the policies and procedures, and educators have a lack of cultural competency and training. The school-to-prison pipeline. Let's talk about that for a moment. What does that mean? That is the likelihood that students who have been suspended, who spend great amounts of time outside of school, the likelihood of them dropping out of school and jumping into the juvenile justice system very early, that is the school-to-prison pipeline. And those things come about when students are disproportionately disadvantaged in our schools. Limited understanding of policies and procedures for families. This means that typically when a student is placed in, receives a referral for a special education and they're placed into the special education program, most of the time what we see is parents just kind of go along with it. Some of the parents will say, okay, well, explain that to me, or make me understand that. But some of the parents are saying, okay, I trust what you're saying, I trust your judgment, but they really do not understand what they are agreeing to for their child. So the policies and procedures that they do not understand does affect how the families and the students interact with this last piece over here, which are our educators. And as educators, we sometimes have a lack of cultural competency, meaning we don't fully understand why a student won't do this when you're providing all of this. We have this great, wonderful learning environment, but a student still does not learn in the way that we feel like they are capable of learning. So we need training to help us understand that there are so many different cultures of students that are in our classrooms, and we cannot base it on specifically how we want to teach or how we want to explain our culture or implement our particular culture in our classrooms. We have to be cognizant of every culture of student in our classroom, and that requires training. Okay, so how does this even happen? What are some of the root causes of disproportionality? This cycle right here of bias, discipline, and exclusion show how we can reinforce one another and create barriers to equity. Okay, so how does it start? It starts with these root causes. We got the teacher beliefs and behaviors. We have our children, the children that we teach, the beliefs and behaviors. And then right here in the middle where they mix and they mingle is the quality of the relationship that we have with those students and the students have with us that creates the next piece. It's either harsh and exclusionary discipline practices. If we have a student that we know is difficult, we've tried everything, and that student still seems to be difficult. we tend to move towards a harsher discipline for that child. Reduced exposure to learning opportunities. That's what happens when they are put into the discipline process. They reduce the time that they're inside of the instructional classroom, learning and growing with us and continuing to build a relationship between you and the child. When we reduce that exposure, we also reduce child engagement in learning. They lose interest in learning what you have to teach. Then we look at racism. This one bounces off here and it goes into this pipeline. It begins here, but it also is at this point, even before we get to the harsh and exclusionary discipline practices. Because of course, right here, a lot of the times this is racism. It's unfortunate, but it is very true. We have an interpersonal level, racial bias. And then we also have an intrapersonal level of stereotype threat. So if a student looks a certain way, if their skin color is different, or if they're dressed a little bit different, sometimes educators can see that as a threat to them and they don't feel comfortable. So here again, it starts the cycle all over again. These root causes, racism on an interpersonal and intrapersonal level, all point towards root causes of disproportionality. So how do we fix it, right? And if you're anything like me, I am a fixer. I want to know, how can I make things better? So let's start with some solutions and alternatives on the teacher side. We can have some training. We can have some cultural diversity training. All of us can learn about other cultures and expand our knowledge of why a culture that is different from ours does things a different way. We have some implicit bias training as well. Any of those things will help us be more fortified in our classrooms to deal with the cultural diversity that comes in our doors every single day. Some of our school practices could include reforming our disciplinary referral systems. A lot of the times I'm seeing now where we're stepping through processes instead of automatically offering a discipline referral. Administrators are checking, have you done X, Y, and Z to make sure that we have covered all the bases before we go to the referral process. I do believe in the school process, in the school practices portion, we, as in-house and county, we've done a really good job moving in that area. We also do, I see this a lot, creating inclusive and equitable classroom environments. Classroom environments that are inviting to all students, even as far as the seating. Some students do not like to sit in the desk. I see couches, I see backless chairs, all things that make sure that the learning environment that we put our students in every single day is conducive and engaging for them. Some of the district level interventions could include providing these intensive class services with small group classes. We have those in each of our schools. Individualized instruction. Of course, in special education, we have that individualized instruction, but it could be spread to all of the students. Okay, so where do we go from here? We've talked about some root causes of disproportionality. We know what disproportionality is now, and we've learned about some fixes that we can make. But where do we go? We look for engagement and we look for advocacy. Advocacy for the children. They need to learn how to advocate for themselves in the classroom to tell the teachers what they need. Educators, we must be ready, we must be willing to advocate for purposes of being able to have the cultural diversity training that we need in order to support the learners that we have in our classrooms each day. And then for our families, we need to make sure that they can advocate on the behalf of their children as well when they sit down and we're talking about policies and procedures that are put in place to help their child be the best that they can be in our schools. Engaging these families and these students to make sure that we are providing the best possible learning that they can have. We can also reform our disciplinary processes. We can look at more equitable treatment in referrals and actions. So we give children a chance to have a behavior, fix a behavior, but also learning some of those skills that will help them be able to modulate their own behavior as it comes up, which drives down referral rates. Some of the systemic changes that we can make, we can address the implicit biases in the policies that we create. We can improve the resource access for non-white students. A lot of the time what we see, and as I was reading and researching, I saw that students felt like they didn't have the same access to information or the same access to certain resources than the white students or their counterparts had. So we definitely would need to look at implementing some equitable systems that would help our children have the same types of access. The urgency of action here cannot be overstated. It is imperative that we move into getting these things in place as quickly as possible. And without these deliberate efforts to make these changes, that school to prison pipeline that we talked about earlier will continue to affect the lives of our kids. If we continue to push them out and they continue to drop out of school, they continue to be disengaged from our schools, that is going to drive that school to prison pipeline number through the roof. My last point here is a quote that I've seen quite a bit, but I think it's very, very important, and I added it here. It says the difference between equity and equality is that equality is letting everyone get the same thing, and equity is everybody getting the things they deserve. And I think that's very important to make mention of when we talk about disproportionality. It's not about doing the same thing for everybody. It's about individualizing the needs and concerns of our students that are in our districts and making sure that they have what they need to be successful.